what makes, in my opinion, entrepreneurs is the fact that there isn't necessarily like a framework or cookie cutter person. It's more like there's traits that someone has, and they just try and figure out along the way.
Our featured speaker is a seasoned product manager and enthusiastic community manager. He's worked in the crypto space, consumer products, orthopedics, and recently at Google. He was accepted into the Antler Incubator, and he runs a London-centric Tech Founders community, Silicon Masons. Neil, it's a great pleasure to have you as our featured guest today. Thanks so much for being willing to share your journey with us.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
A lot of the time we like to kick off sort of getting an understanding of your history. What would you say are the experiences that you've had or the mentors that you've had in your life that led you down your path? And were there any particular memories that you have that made you make certain choices in your career from like a younger age?
Let me think about that. There's a podcaster who some of you might be familiar with, Harry Stebbings. He runs like the 20 VC podcast. He has like an investment thesis that entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs from childhood, whether or not you believe in that, I don't know. But he says that there's at least some evidence that people have always been trying to hustle or make money or try and start businesses. I wouldn't say I was overtly trying to start any businesses, but I definitely like to try and make money. But I think most of it started when I was at university. I mean, I was never too engaged with studies, mostly for the fact that I didn't resonate much with like classroom style rote learning. I wasn't able to sit still, I would say. But then when I got to university, I was able to connect more of what we're learning to the outcome. I think it was much more hands on, particularly my course. I studied product design engineering. It was drawing, sketching, modeling, more design based than artistic, but pairing that with more the hardcore engineering, the mechanical engineering side. And so it was super applicable. I could understand why I was learning what I was learning. When I was at university, I took part in something called the Salter Foundation, which is basically a scholarship that sent me over to San Francisco. And I worked in an incubator, this sort of, or a company, I should say, that was part of an incubator. And I was working as a startup team of 9 on a device to detect ovarian cancer. And of course, in Silicon Valley, it's the home of innovation and technology. So I think that's what really sparked my interest. It opens your eyes to what's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very cool that you had that early experience. Do you think you sort of now still have a bit of a draw to Silicon Valley because of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been 10 years, showing my age probably, but yes, I probably underappreciated the opportunity at the time. I look back now and you realize how hard it is to actually get back over there, just from a visa perspective. The opportunity I was given was like I still loved every minute of it. I just don't think I realized how lucky I was to have an opportunity like that. So yeah, I look back now and I think I'd love to go back and spend more time there. It's definitely like a really thriving ecosystem, obviously, for entrepreneurship and innovation and technology. And despite, I guess, what some people say, it's definitely still the leader in the tech industry.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually had the experience of being a founder in residence at the zero day investor Antler. Can you tell us about that experience? Do you feel like there was some similarities between that experience and your earlier 10 years ago experience?
It's an interesting question. So maybe to expand more, the incubator that I was in San Francisco, it wasn't necessarily that I was in the incubator trying to create a startup. It was basically a startup, it was very early stage, had a little bit of funding, but the incubator basically provided office space and there was 9 or 10 different companies there. And it was run by people who had basically done really well in their career, venture capitalists, and they would provide, guidance and advice. So it was more the fact that particular environment, these people already had companies. You were speaking to people who were super early stage, sort of scrappy entrepreneurs. You were also surrounded by a load of really amazing, impressive people who had been there and done it before. The Antler opportunity was much more like, okay, I'm now trying to start my own company. And I could definitely take a lot of what I'd seen 10 years ago into the experience. But trying to do your own thing is just totally different. Even if you think you're prepared for, or in theory, you've read all the books and you've watched all the podcasts and you've gone into YC's like startup school videos on YouTube. It's like when you're actually there trying to do it on a daily basis, it's different experiences, but both incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely a true aspect of people read about it, listen to podcasts about it, and learn about it in an academic sense. But when you actually get into entrepreneurship, starting your own thing, your feet hit the floor, so to speak. And that's a really, really different experience. So, how did that go? Like, how did your Antler experience go in regards to what was the process like to some degree? I assume there's some things you can't share, and that's totally cool, but just in a general sense.
Yeah, happy to share more. So I'll take a step back and talk about, yeah, what is Antler? What's a zero day investor? So essentially, it's an incubator, as we mentioned. The idea is you go in pre-idea and pre-co-founding team. Now, this isn't always the case. There are some people who go in as a team, some people who go in with ideas. In fact, most people who apply, I would say, have ideas. If you're entrepreneurial, you're probably always thinking about different problems and how you might be able to solve them. But for the most part, you go in to meet people who you may want to start a business with. So there is a sort of technical skill set and a non-technical skill set. It sounds a little bit binary, and truthfully, I think a little bit too binary because I believe there's a spectrum of are you like technical or non-technical. But nonetheless, you sort of pair a commercial person with sort of builder technical person, and you go in and you kind of speed date, for lack of a better word, try and speak to as many people as possible. You maybe speak to multiple people at the same time. You see if you like them, and you try and kind of fail fast in the relationship. So even if someone has a stellar background and on paper they look absolutely amazing, it all comes down to, do I like working together? Could I see myself spending every day, 7 days a week for the next 10 years with this person? And they're the things that you're trying to figure out, as well as obviously coming up with a solution to a problem that you see. So the process to get in is essentially, yeah, an application. You answer a question or a couple of questions. You go through rounds of interviews, and I think for our cohort, there's about 4,500 people applied, and there was 85 accepted at the start of the program. People sort of gradually left if they decided it wasn't for them. But yeah, it was around a 2% acceptance rate. And then on day one, you're sort of there ready to work as hard as possible and meet as many people as possible. So yeah, that's, I guess, high level what the program is. My own experience of being in there, I think it was the right thing for me because I'd always talked about wanting to start a company. And it's very easy to talk about wanting to start a company. Actually, then turning that into action is, there's always a reason not to. Okay, I don't have a co-founder, or this idea, I haven't had time to build it, or once I get to an MVP stage, or once I get my first three customers, or once I, there's always this like moving target as to when you're actually going to quit your job and go all into this thing. And the advantage of these incubators, these sort of accelerators, is that you have to quit your job to enter them. So you go in, I had left my job, which I really loved my job, and I met super like smart people and had gained, I guess, like trust of the people that I worked with, and felt like I was respected within the role enough to take on responsibility and things. So I was comfortable in that regard. It was still fast paced, it was challenging, but I was comfortable in what I was doing at that stage. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to start a company, I need to actually just go out of your comfort zone, quit your job, not have an income, and go for it. And so joining Antler was that forcing function to do so. I started in September last year. The first few weeks, you're feeling people out. You're trying to say, speak to as many people as possible. You want to know not just about what's your idea, which is what's so easy to default to. It's very much like day one, hey, what's your idea? What's your idea? What's your idea? But Antler very much encourage you to get to know who people are and more about their background. So they want you to try and explore essentially like complementary skill sets. So if Spencer has a background in robotics and Neil has a background in kitchen appliances, maybe we do robotic kitchen appliances because there's a nice complementary skill set there. But it's an area that only you and I would have a sort of insight into amongst the millions of other people who are trying to solve problems. It wouldn't make sense for Spencer and I to go into the business of sustainability or something if neither of us have ever worked in. They try and encourage you to dig into each other's background, go a level like deeper than just the veneer of like, I work in product and I work at this company. Because once you start speaking to people, you can really start to, the most random things come out that you just don't expect, and it's not on someone's CV, and they don't even realize that it's an interesting experience, and just like off the cuff they'll say, oh yeah, I once did this thing on pricing. You're like, oh, that's funny, because I've actually spent 6 months of my job on a project relating to pricing, and I didn't even think that was part of my background. And before you know it, you're like, oh, maybe we have something here. So they really encourage you to dig into people's backgrounds and pull a bit on the thread and see, yeah, if there's any opportunities to work together. So tried through that. I really like lent in. I think I had notes. I'd literally had like a database in Notion of every single person in the cohort, and then like had I met them, and then I ranked them based on like technical proficiency. It was based like technical like domain, like was there overlap with a domain that I felt I could provide value in, and then also just like vibes, like could I see myself working with the person, and then also took notes on things like what had they told me about their personal life, just so I could recall these things, what are their interests and what kind of things they're into. Definitely like followed all the advice, and a lot of it is then focused on, okay, how do we really understand the problem area? How do we, validate that our problem is a legitimate problem and not go building and spending 12 weeks building this, this thing that doesn't actually solve a problem. I'll pause there. I can talk more to my thoughts on that, the process in general, but that was like a high level overview of how it went.
Yeah, very cool. I remember you also made a Notion database of like a lot of things you'd read over a number of years. And that's something that actually quite inspired me to do a similar thing, to start doing a similar thing. So it doesn't surprise me at all to hear that you're like really taking it seriously and engaging with it fully. I think that's really important. Taking this leap of faith, and then I feel like so many people wouldn't fully engage with it out of like some fear or concern about it. And I think you really, really did that.
Yeah, and I think that is an important point, because one of the things that threw me a little bit was, I think, and I'm very all or nothing. I'm like, I go all into things, I get obsessed with things. And I think it can be a blessing and a curse in some regards, depending on what you get into. But I kind of assumed that everyone there would be like 150% like commitment level. I was like canceling all weekend plans, not seeing friends, like, which, isn't sustainable. But it's a 3-month cohort. And if you want to build a business, you just simply are going to have to work really, really hard. That's just like, there's no two ways about it. But there were people there who were kind of still working little side gigs here and there, and you could tell they just weren't 100% focused and dedicated towards starting a business. Which you can say, okay, there's 85 people in the cohort, 5 might realize they don't like it in the first few weeks and leave. That's fine. 10 may actually be kind of like, well, some of the Antler partners referred to as tourists, right? So it's like people who are here to see what it's like and have fun and like, dip the toe in, but they're not serious about committing to it. And you can kind of identify and segment like, who are the people that are super serious about this and who do I want to work with. And then within the remaining people, it's either technical, non-technical. I'm like non-technical, so I need to work with the technical person, and you can whittle it down and very quickly identify, like, I need to be speaking to these people, and like really starting to hone in on which of those relationships I want to like place my bets on.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Did you end up matching up with a group that you wanted to progress through? How did that go?
So the average founder within the cohort has 3 co-founding relationships. So that's why it's a little bit like speeding. You could refer to it as Love Island. I'm not a Love Island viewer, but that's kind of what I imagine it feels like, which is, you have people joining late and they were sort of like walking in, and suddenly everyone's attention be like, who's that person over there? And like, what's their background? And you're always kind of on a weekly basis, you would stand up and present on Monday what you'd achieved. And so you could kind of get a feel for, oh, who are the people who are leading the pack. And obviously everyone wants to work with the people who are perceived to be like the best. And at that point, a lot of the CV starts to just melt away, truthfully. I mean, on paper, before going in, you think that person's amazing. At the end of the day, it's like, how much momentum do you have? Are you actually going at, like, are you able to identify problems? Are you able to, speak to customers? What novel insights do you really have? And how much progress are you making? Are you willing to put in the work? And so you sort of start to see this natural like leaderboard, I guess, emerge, and you start to see the relationships. From one week you think, oh, that couple are super strong, and it actually appears like everything's going really well from the outside, and then before you know it, like they're broken up because they just, maybe may not have been working well together. So yeah, that's a bit of context, which is you have lots of relationships. Add to 3, 4, they're called like hard and soft track outs. So soft track out would be like, Spencer and I are working together. Maybe I will still chat to Giovanni, but for the most part, we're trying to progress something. You're not completely just, you're spending time working on a problem together rather than just speaking to people about, what they like to do and understanding who they are. And then a hard tracker is like Spencer and I are a team. We have a coach. So we have an advisor from the Antler program, and they're going to give us feedback. They're going to hold us accountable. They're going to rank us on a weekly basis on this scorecard as to like, how are we getting on? Do they advise that we actually break up because we're not making enough progress? They can't force you to break up, but they can tell you what they think and advise. And so I had three, I think, hard trackouts and like one other sort of soft. Everyone I worked with, I like learned a tremendous amount from. I would say there was one relationship that probably towards the end, you feel as though it's a 12-week program. At the end of the 12 weeks, you get investment or you don't. But you can work back from there. So there's like stage gates. So if you're not on a team by week 8, it's unlikely you're going to be able to find someone, find a problem together, speak to users, validate the problem, come up with a solution or a potential solution to the problem, and then pitch, the next week or so to get investment. It's like that's unlikely. So they say, right, if you're not a team, you can still join an existing team as a third member or fourth member, depending on how many people are in a team, but you can't create a new team. Week 8 is the stage gate for like being in a team, and then I think like week 9 is the stage gate for being invited to what they call preliminary investment committee. Week 10, you basically get an investment committee date if you've passed the preliminary investment committee, and then you've got a few weeks to basically prepare and present for that. So come week 6, week 7, if you're not in a team, you're thinking, well, I'm going to leave here sort of empty handed. I've only been here 6, 7 weeks. I'm just getting started into my entrepreneurial journey. So there's a bit of a feeling of I need to find someone to start a business with, which one of my biggest like learnings, which is that is not the right approach. And that's not to discredit the Antler model. It's more just like I really would advise against feeling like you should find someone to start a business with just because it's like a really important decision. So there was one relationship I felt probably that was the case. The others were just like I worked with someone who's still a friend, Annie. He was like amazing background, tech lead at Postman. He was super passionate about more the dev tool side, and I didn't feel like I could provide value there. I've not been a software developer and I've not worked in dev tools. So my our complementary skill sets in that regard, we did have complementary skill sets, but where we were most passionate was kind of areas outside the Venn crossover. And so we went separate directions and we still chat and I learned an unbelievable amount. But that was an example of like we came together, we thought we've got something super strong here, and ultimately we kind of moved in different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so often entrepreneurs I've talked to have said something along the lines of my founding team is basically like a marriage. Like that's how significant that relationship choice is. And they also call their startup their baby, right? Like that happens all the time. So I feel like you've come in with the right mentality of like, this is a serious choice. This isn't, what did you say? Like, not a tourist. And I think that's really smart.
Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show.
Now, we both attended some events for a different incubator. I'm very happy to say it, but I'm not going to say the name unless you're all comfortable sharing it as well. And basically, one of the things that you and I both found was that they were sort of, in general, looking for people a little bit younger than us, maybe in their early 20s stage. That was something that I thought personally didn't make a lot of sense because it was so focused on what you've had experience in. But I thought it would be good to hear your thoughts on that and see, how your feelings were on it.
Yeah, so the other one is Entrepreneur First, and Entrepreneur First are, I think, the two biggest sort of accelerators, incubators in London and therefore the UK, I guess. It's a slightly different model. It's definitely, in my opinion, index is more, yeah, around less experience, like potential for excellence rather than, I think, what they call demonstrate excellence, which with all these things, I mean, ultimately, there's VCs. VCs get money from LPs, and their job is to deploy capital, and they basically craft a thesis as to why they have seen something that other VCs haven't and will therefore return more money. Now, both of these like high level thesis of Antler and EF is we're going to get in day zero, we're going to get in super early stage, and therefore we will take more equity for less money and have tremendous upside. Obviously, the risk is higher because at that point there is really no business and you could be throwing money down the toilet because you haven't even really truly validated that a real solution to a problem or even that the problem exists. Similar to Y Combinator, but Y Combinator does exist in more like existing businesses that might have some traction. But yeah, the difference is being I think Antler invests more. I think I heard that the average years of experience at Antler was like 10. That was probably increased slightly by some people who were like had 30 years of experience. There was a few people. I would say the average age was probably around 30, say, versus EF Entrepreneur First is probably mid 20s. Yeah, ultimately it's a different model. EF have an amazing program by looks things. I've got loads of friends who have been through the program. I think with these things, it's hard to tell what the best model is because it takes 10 years to play out. Entrepreneur First have had some big wins. Antler have had a couple of big wins, but it's going to be a while before we actually find out which model is ultimately better. I do think Entrepreneur First attract like incredibly talented people. Some of the people I met there were some of the smartest people I've ever met. So I do think their talent acquisition strategy is incredibly strong. They've also built up an amazing brand where I think and this is the founder of Entrepreneur First has talked about this on a podcast. I think it was the 20 VC podcast. He talked about the difference in culture between the US and the UK. A lot of talented individuals who come out of top universities in the UK, like Oxford and Cambridge, Imperial, and all these others, they aspire to go work at Jane Street, where you can work, earn incredible amount of money with much lower risk. Whereas in America, you come out of Stanford and you aspire to start a company and take that risk, and it's not seen as like what you're doing with your life, why you're not making top money. It's like it's more respected, I guess, as part of the culture to take tremendous amounts of risk. All that to be said, I think what EF have done well is create this brand which is around exceptionalism. So they basically will attach the label of with you if you have been through their program, which is obviously attractive to many exceptional young people who like the idea of being recognized for being exceptional as well. And they are, but it's more like the brand is super strong where it seemed to be just as sexy to go to EF as it is to go to Jane Street or one of these other incredibly high paying jobs. And so they're kind of trying to change the mindset a little bit about starting companies.
Absolutely. I think it's super important to sort of get people excited to be starting companies. Personally, I think that's something really powerful. Now, you've worked in quite a number of different fields now. We did list them all, but we worked together at Shark Ninja. You did some help building wind turbines, I think, during early years. You've worked in crypto, helping keep the crypto economy safe. What's that? Elliptic, and now you're working at Google. Do you see there are common threads within these experiences for you as like why you chose these experiences in particular?
I don't know about why I chose them. I think there's like things you can apply to them all. Ultimately, I think what the common thread is probably in being like a product design engineer, which I'm no longer. I'm a product manager, but I'll still like to. This will probably you're not meant to be a product design engineer, and by the way, I don't do design or engineering in my day-to-day job. But I think it's what I mean is mindset to solving problems. Ultimately, concept of product design engineering, the field, the practice emerged I believe, at least in the UK, late 90s, early 2000s was the first time that the course had been taught, and it's still only taught in two universities, I think, in Scotland. But the idea was that mechanical engineers were super focused on the technical nitty gritty and perhaps weren't able to empathize with users as much. Meanwhile, you might have had industrial designers who were creating beautiful concept cars, but maybe didn't understand the technical, limitations of actually implementing that thing. And then you had business people who were like, "We want to make money, like make," and that is the stereotype, by the way. I'm not suggesting that is the case, but you can understand what like how that might have happened. And so the field of product design engineering was sort of created and taught in universities, and it was a sort of hybrid where you're by no means the strongest mechanical engineer, by no means the most artistic and like talented industrial designer, and you're not like this McKinsey consultant MBA, but you kind of have an understanding of all three and you can be the glue in between. And so it used to be, yeah, that I was much more hands-on and actually building solutions to problems. As you mentioned, had worked in like orthopedics, had done some work on like wind turbines, had done some consumer electronics products when we worked together. I then moved into software, and because I had no background in software engineering and coding, product management was a sort of easier segue into the world of software. And I guess product managers frame the problem, they don't solve the problem. So it's very much like, okay, what's the biggest problem we can solve? How do we best leverage engineering and design resource to, make money for the business and solve our users' problems? The skills that I'd learned from a young age and at university were still applicable. It was just in a very different domain. Crypto, anti-money laundering, it's building risk engines that we were doing for crypto. So different problem set, but ultimately you still need to understand a user's problem and you still need to make sure that it's technically feasible to solve, and you need to make sure that it's commercially viable and therefore make money from it. So that I would say is like the common thread throughout all of it.
That's really great. I think it's interesting because I've actually talked to quite a few different product design engineers who, obviously with Shark Ninja, have sort of expressed the same position. And I feel like it's something that doesn't seem to exist like in the US or many other places. It seems like a fairly uniquely UK thing. Is that your experience as well?
US, yes, I think at Shark Ninja was the case that, for example, Dyson were also big proponents of the like product design engineering model. Obviously, Shark Ninja have a similar model, and there's a few different universities in the UK. Whether I think in America it's much more like you are, an exceptional mechanical engineer, and you sort of specialize more on the systems. I understand. Add a caveat that obviously it's been a few years since I formally like stepped away from that world, and also from what I've seen, it's purely because America is such a big place. Like for example, I've been thinking a lot about what is the concept of a product design engineer in software now that there are so many different AI tools. So I use Cursor, I use Figma, I use Vercel V0, and like I can again not like create beautiful like elegant code, and my designs are pretty average, if you could even call it that. But what I am able to do is visually communicate an idea and then now build it and give it to someone. So that is more of like a hybrid product design engineer skill set. And I've been looking like, where are the product design engineers in software? Like, who are they? I've not seen many of them, but I have seen quite a few over in the States. And they're people who like from a very young age have been playing with computers and coding. Maybe they taught themselves, maybe they studied at uni, then they've decided that they want to pick up design and they've actually spent years being a designer. And it's like, if you can amalgamate those skill sets, it's so unbelievably powerful. And I think naturally, because the US and Silicon Valley being a nexus for technology and innovation, it probably attracts more of those people than at least the UK have it in software. So it doesn't directly answer your point around like hardware product design engineers in the UK versus US, but I'm noticing a lot more like what I call software product design engineers over in the US. I don't see enough of it, I don't think, in the UK.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And there's such a powerful aspect nowadays with through the internet of self-teaching, like skill sets and combinations of skill sets that I think it's impossible to totally, limit education to a place now because it is so broadly shared through the internet. Giovanni actually had a question about your time with Antler and EF.
Thank you, Neil, for the very nice insight. I would have a question regarding on it. I would be curious about what was the most important lesson you learned at Antler. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, good question. I think most important lesson I learned to EF. I wasn't like, so I only went to Saturday morning club and I met like, I say, unbelievable people. But the format of the Saturday morning club was for people who were in full-time jobs and weren't yet maybe ready to quit their jobs. You could go and try and meet co-founders and start business on the side. I think in reality that thesis was disproved because I don't think anyone from the Saturday morning club started business that they then quit their job for. I think it was more like a networking opportunity and you could go and sit and speak to people. So if anything, my primary lesson there was just the fact that I needed to quit my job. That was where I was like, every week I'm meeting these incredible people, having the most unbelievable discussions. I'm coming away where like my brain is just so, it's like firing off of all these ideas. And I'm like now ready to get into that and explore it. And now I'm going back to work. I think that feeling was so like jarring for me where I just thought, this isn't working. you're all in, or you're doing it or you're not. You have to go all in, quitting my job. And so that was probably the number one lesson from EF. Antler, there's a few things. Yeah, I don't know if I could come up with one. I think maybe things that like. Ultimately, when you're in these things, you have to and be able to say things that when no one else is watching, that you really believe. And it's very easy to sit there and be like, I want to start a company. But like, are you willing to do what it takes? Are you willing to put in the work? Do you want to work with this person? Do you want to work on that problem space? And I think some of those things specifically were things that I didn't realize I'd have such a hard time looking at myself in the mirror and saying. For example, could I work? I have a background in anti-money laundering and crypto, which is essentially, yeah, it's the field of compliance. That therefore would have been one of my circles in the Venn diagram. Do I want to go into compliance? If I met a software developer who had worked in building risk engines in compliance or crypto, that would have been a very strong, what you call like founder market fit. Do I want to spend the next 5 years or 10 years of my life within the compliance space? I think there are things that you just have to ask yourself. And for me, I loved, again, my time at Elliptic, but there's a big difference between working at a company where in theory you can leave if you fancy doing something else versus it being your company where you're wedded to it. Spencer called it your baby. I don't have advice on how to start a good company because I've not started a good company. I failed. And you could think of it like, I'll come back to when I actually successfully start a company. But I think for me, what really mattered and what I came out of Antler thinking was I really want to work in a problem space that gets me out of bed in the morning. I can force myself. I can like brute force it, I guess you could say. I'm willing to put in a lot of work, but at some point it becomes a drain on your energy. And that goes for the problem space that you're trying to work in, but also the people that you're working with, which is, I think, my main learning. And again, I haven't been able to validate that this is the best approach. I just really get a buzz off of who I work with. I think I was super lucky to work with amazingly talented people at Shark Ninja, but also at Elliptic, where I learned more about building software products. And I would call it was a startup. I call lots of the people, most of the people that I worked with, like friends, and it gives you that buzz because they understand you. You know what they're going to say before they say it. They know what you're going to say before, and it's like having that like really deep intuition for how to get the best out of each other is just something that I took for granted. And I assumed I'd be able to get to that point with someone much quicker than I could. And it took me much longer to build conviction on people. I think having now gone through it, I want to work on a problem area that I'm super passionate about and work with people that I basically call friends. Now, that's not going to be easy to find random people and make friendships with them and trust them and have them be, like technically exceptional and product minded and all the other things. So you obviously will have to compromise in some areas, but I think I want to index more around, do I just get on with the people I'm working with? Do I really want to like spend a lot of time with them? Could I see myself being friends with them?
Yeah, that's a great point. Finding the right combinations of people for creating a company is a constant topic of conversation in Founders Voyage. And actually, one of the reasons that Nancy and I started doing this every week 5 years ago was because we wanted to be getting regular exposure to people who, amazing, passionate people like yourself, and getting that sort of excitement from being able to talk to them and understand their journey. Now, I feel like that's a really good transition to ask you about Silicon Masons, right? Because you've started this pretty active community of really phenomenal people in London. I guess, where did the motivation for that come from, and what do you see as sort of the going forward plan?
Yeah, it was a master plan. No, I actually look back now and it's funny the way that it's turned out because in theory it was what I wanted or like hoped or wished it could be, and it actually has worked out. But I think at the time, basically, I knew at some point I wanted to start a company. And truthfully, I think you can do a lot of things that make you feel good about moving in the right direction. I really strongly advise taking aggressive action because, as I say, there's always a moving target. If you want to start a company and you have a co-founder, quit your job, try to do it, make it happen. I think it was one of those things where I was telling myself, like, yes, I'm getting closer towards starting a company because I'll start this community of other people who want to start a company, and I'll maybe meet a co-founder. Maybe they'll be my first customers. Maybe they'll be advisors. Maybe they'll be employees down the line. Like, how do I just meet people who are also interested in starting companies and learn from them? And so it started literally like, I think I don't know, 12 people or something that I knew in London who were interested in entrepreneurship. I had some friends who were like building side projects, and friends who had literally just gone through Antler and had raised a bit of money, and then some friends who, didn't know where to start, but had always wanted to. And I thought, we'll just go for a few beers. And then fast forward to today, there's like 115 people in it, and it is full of people who have raised money, full of people who are like actively building, impressive side projects. Also got VCs in it. So, you know, VCs have money to give to founders. Founders need money from someone. So it's been successful. We've had like, I don't know, 10 meetups or something, but I would say most of the engagement is within the chat. And I think what I want to try and do now is, having now gone through the Antler experience and having an arm's length sort of seen a little bit about the EF model and had friends who've gone through that. I think I'm interested in open sourcing some of the value that these programs give you. Ultimately, I don't have money to invest in these companies. I would like to angel invest in some of the companies that come through Silicon Masons. And so that regard, it's good at like access for me to meet super talented people who are up and coming. But I'm interested in like the things that are gated. Like ultimately, what you're saying is value that Entrepreneur First or Antler give me is equivalent to 10% of my company, or 8% of my company, or however much they take. I think it's 8 at EF and 10 at Antler. Now, the value that they give you is the sum of the dollars, the amount that they invest, but also it is the coaching through the cohort, it's the network that they give you access to, it's the continued support that they give you afterwards, it's the press releases when they shout about you and say, "Are you portfolio company? So amazing, go check them out." So like you can, in theory, put like a value on that and say, okay, is it like a good deal? Now that's again not for me to judge. My point is, for free as part of these communities, how much of that value can I get? And I think that's interesting to me, which is, okay, well, the coaching, what am I being coached on? I'm being coached on things that, like, as a product person, I know nothing about or haven't really had much exposure to, which is how do you manage a cap table, or what is angel investing, or like how do I go and pitch to VCs? How do I find VCs? What is a VC? How does the model work? Or like what are drag along rights? What are tag along rights? Like there's so much stuff that, regardless if you're a super talented builder or like, entrepreneurial product manager, you probably just haven't had exposure to. And that's not because you don't understand it, it's just because you've never had to do it before. And so that was like so much of what I got from Antler, given that I didn't come out of it with a business and a co-founder, was that learning. It was unbelievable. And obviously the network as well. I think in Silicon Masons, the network is getting there. I think there's already an incredible amount of people who you can go and meet and speak to and learn from. I think if we can also understand what are founders, where are the areas that founders feel like they have blind spots in? Is it in business finance? Is it in operations? Is it in go to market? And then how can we, as like a mind hive or hive mind, collectively help them with these problems? Then I think that's a super interest. It's open sourcing the knowledge that you get in these incubators. I think it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very cool concept. I think you've also, I didn't realize quite how big it had gotten, but I think that's in itself shows that people are already feeling there's value in it because they're inviting people that they respect and think would bring value into it, right?
And I think, just to riff on that, that's also an interesting thing, which is the model of it is it's a closed group on WhatsApp. Anyone can invite people, and then I review them. Now, I've never actually rejected anyone before, but even having that gate, that wall, which is to say I have to ask that someone gets in and then clicks approve, it adds a layer of almost like accountability. Like when you invite someone, when you ask if they can join the group, you're saying, I vouch for this person's credibility. I think this person's a super interesting person. I'm like, they're my friend, they're good, whatever. I've found that that's a really effective filter for just getting really high quality people, because nobody wants to feel like they invited someone who, wasn't. And so far, it's almost like this. I've never said these are the kind of people we're looking for. I've never tried to, like, I say, I've never rejected anyone from the group. However, like really interesting and curious people typically know really interesting and curious people. And so it's a nice like network effect in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super powerful. Now, about ideas. Now, you and I are both people who have many different ideas all the time about things we want to work on. You've talked about that a number of times, and I think that's a really powerful trait for an entrepreneur to have. But I think it can also result in sort of the magpie effect where you like see something new and shiny and chase it, and then something else and something else. What I thought would be interesting would be understanding from you your evaluation criteria for like how you dismiss ideas being like maybe it's a good idea but it's not right for you versus when you think, oh, this is something worth at least investigating. Do you have that sort of criteria developed?
I mean, yes and no. There's like where especially as like a product person, there's things that you just think through whenever you're assessing investing more time, energy, resource, money into something. Antler did actually have a framework. They had like an idea killing framework, and it was just a bit of a sniff test of like how big is the market, how big's the pain point, and like I don't know. There's like 8 questions or something. All those questions are super relevant, and it does make sense to ask those questions. I guess going back to, and this is a me thing, everyone's different. Like, what do I really care deeply about? Like, what do I want to spend time on? I can optimize this problem area and solution idea to what looks best or is desired by a VC, which is ultimately they're trying to maximize the return on their investment. And so they want you to be the next Facebook. Maybe you don't want to be the next Facebook, but you can still be an incredibly successful business. And so when it comes to, is this like an idea I want to pursue? I would say I would actually reframe that probably more as that like a problem, the idea, the solution is going to change undoubtedly. Like, is this a problem where I'm like, I want to pursue this? This is my life's work. Maybe not, but is this something I'm willing to spend years on? Honestly, it's like, am I spending the mornings when I wake up and I'm commuting to work and I'm reading an article about it before I'm going to bed? I'm thinking about it and I want to listen to podcasts on the weekend. I want, it's like, is that the type of problem we're talking about? Am I speaking to people about it, or am I doing it because there's a huge TAM? And so going back to your, I guess the root of the question, I actually because I'm quite curious. There's lots of things where I can get like that if I spend enough time and I see the person's problem firsthand and I can empathize with it. I really can get like obsessive over problems, and I can try and chase quite a few different things. So I guess the answer is I don't know if I have an answer. I try and remain focused on, like, when I see something where I'm like, this is a problem that I want to solve, I do try and remain focused on it. I try not to just drop it immediately. Ultimately, I think there's knowing when to move on from something if you're not seeing the traction you need. And I think that is something where only you'll know, because for every story of, the failed entrepreneur who spent all their time trying to solve a problem and forcing a solution at the problem, and it went to nothing and they lost all their money. He spent 5 years of their life. There's also the story of Figma, who spent 4 years before they released Figma, and funnily enough it became Figma. So I don't know if that's an answer, as if to as I say, what makes, in my opinion, entrepreneurs is the fact that there isn't necessarily like a framework or cookie cutter person. It's more like there's traits that someone has, and they just try and figure out along the way.
I just thought getting your perspective on that would be very interesting, and I was very right on that. The last question is very open for however you sort of want to interpret it, but it's basically, what words of wisdom do you want to leave us with today?
I've been thinking, I went to the Bob Dylan movie last night. It was amazing. He was a bit of a rogue. I actually got a lot of like creative inspiration from it, where he just like did the things. He sang the songs he wanted to sing, marched to the beat of his own drum kind of thing. Relating that back, that analogy. I honestly think as an entrepreneur or someone who's interested in founding a business, you can just get so lost in these like frameworks and podcasts, and everyone has the answer and the solution, and do these 4 steps and go into this incubator, and everyone's going to tell you what to do. Entrepreneurs kind of march to the beat of their own drum. Like, the whole point is that you've like done, there is no answer, there's no like 12-step plan. It's like you zig when others zag, and you do things differently. And obviously you can do things that are obviously stupid, but ultimately it's like follow your curiosity, do the things that like you're super passionate about, and be creative. Kind of listen to the advice, but don't listen too much to the advice. But I'll caveat all that by saying I'm not a successful founder, and so maybe a successful founder should give you advice on how to be a successful founder.
Well, when you look into it, every or nearly every successful founder had a series of failures beforehand, So I think the fact that you've, tried different things and had failures or, learning experiences would be a better way maybe to call them, I think puts you well further on the line of getting to a big success if that's something you want to be doing, obviously.
Yeah. I just learned so much over the last 6 months, and I had some of the most fun I've ever had. And I felt more like a product design engineer where I got to do a bit of I got hands on with everything, and I got to do marketing, and I got to present, and I got to build the product and do Figma and everything. And it's like, if you want to learn, you'll learn more and by just quitting your job and trying to start something that you will doing anything else. And if it doesn't come good, I ended up getting a job at Google. So it's by no means like a failure, I guess. It's just get going, start today, and I think good things will happen.
Excellently said. Thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate you coming on today, sharing your experiences with us, the lessons you've learned. It helps all of us improve as entrepreneurs and in some ways as people as well. Thank you very much, Giovanni, also for joining us today. We really appreciate you bringing questions and energy to the discussion. I and the rest of the Founders Voyage team feel fortunate to be part of this community and for the opportunity to bring this cooperative learning experience every week. And we really appreciate feedback from everyone. Neil, especially, if you have anyone else you think we should come on and interview or discuss or would get value from the community, feel free to nominate them. We always love to have interesting people on. And we actually have a similar model to Silicon Masons in that regard. Feel free to check out the topical chat channels if you have a chance. Thank you again for joining. Have a great day and evening ahead. And you can obviously find Founders Voyage through LinkedIn, our Patreon, and the podcast.
Nice one. Thanks for having me.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.